Today, we will go over two stories that, although they are completely separate events, they do share striking similarities. So similar, I might say, that if not paying close attention, one might think I am repeating the same story. It's hard to imagine something like this happening in the middle of a bustling city and no one noticing, no family, no friends, no neighbors, no one. This is the story of Joyce Vincent. Joyce Vincent was born in London on October 19, 1965. She was the daughter of Caribbean immigrants and grew up in the shadow of personal tragedy. Her mother passed away when she was just 11 years old, and her relationship with her father was strained, distant at best. Despite the hardships, Joyce was charismatic, beautiful, intelligent, her smile was infectious, and she exuded a quiet charm that drew people in. In the 1980s, she found work in the music industry, rubbing shoulders with celebrities, even meeting Nelson Mandela, and reportedly attending events with stars like Stevie Wonder and Betty Wright. But underneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they appeared. Joyce often drifted from job to job. She seemed to avoid forming deep, lasting relationships. She'd cut ties with old friends. Even her closest acquaintances said she was hard to read, mysterious, and eventually, she began to disappear from their lives altogether. By the early 2000s, Joyce was no longer the vibrant woman who once mingled in elite social circles. She had distanced herself from almost everyone. Some believe she was escaping a toxic or abusive relationship. Others suspect she suffered from severe trauma or depression. In 2003, Joyce moved into a small bedsit flat, apartment 142, in the North London district of Wood Green. The property was run by a housing association and catered to victims of domestic abuse. Her rent was partially subsidized by social services. She had little contact with anyone, even though she lived in one of the busiest cities in the world. And then she vanished. But not in the way you might expect. Joyce Vincent didn't go missing. She didn't pack her bags and disappear. She didn't run away or leave a note. Fast forward to January 25, 2006, nearly 3 years later, officials from the housing association entered the flat given that Joyce's rent had stopped being paid. The apartment was due for repossession. What they found was something no one could have imagined. Joyce's skeleton lay on the floor of the living room. A shopping bag was next to her. The room was filled with mold and dust. Plates were stacked in the sink, and the TV, unbelievably, was still on. It had been on for years, running on autopilot. The windows were sealed shut. Her mail had piled up at the door. But in a building filled with residents, no one had knocked. No one had checked in. No one had heard a thing. Her remains were so decomposed that cause of death could not be determined. Police found no signs of foul play, no clear evidence of suicide. It was as if her body had simply given up, and no one had come to help. How could a person die in the heart of a metropolis and be forgotten? That question has haunted many. Joyce had once been surrounded by people. She'd had friends, colleagues, lovers. She was only 38 years old, but in her final days, she was completely and utterly alone. Many tried to reconstruct what happened. Some believe she suffered from severe asthma and may have died from an attack. Others suggest an undiagnosed illness took her life. Perhaps the silence that filled her home after death was the same silence that had filled her life for years. But the more troubling questions are the ones we ask ourselves. How does someone fall so far through the cracks that their death goes unnoticed for almost 3 years? Why didn't anyone call her, visit her, miss her? Authorities later discovered that Joyce had been estranged from her family. She had quit her job, changed her number, left no emergency contact. The support systems we all assume we'll have in place were gone, and without those, Joyce simply faded. The story made headlines after it was reported in early 2006. People across the UK and the world were shocked. It forced a reckoning about community, about loneliness, about the fragility of human connection in an age of growing isolation. In 2011, filmmaker Carol Morley released a powerful documentary titled Dreams of a Life, which sought to tell Joyce's story. She interviewed people who had once known her, friends, former co-workers, lovers, people who all shared the same disbelief. How could this have happened? And yet, none of them had stayed in her life long enough to know she was gone. The film painted a portrait of a woman who was vibrant, complex, and quietly struggling, a woman who fell through society's cracks, not because she was invisible, but because we stopped looking. The year was 1966. In a quiet corner of Zagreb, Croatia, Hedviga Golik was a quiet woman in her early 40s, known to a few in the building as polite, reserved, and somewhat of a recluse. She lived alone in a modest apartment on the upper floor of a complex on Medvedgradska Street, not far from the city center, but tucked away enough that life inside those walls remained private. Hedviga had worked for years in a local factory and lived a simple, unobtrusive life. She had no children, no close family in the area. To most, she was just another face among many in a city bustling with change. Fast forward some time, no one can quite agree on the exact day Hedviga disappeared. Just like that. Some say they hadn't seen her in weeks. Others assumed she had moved away, perhaps to live with relatives, perhaps to another city, but she was never reported missing, not officially. This was a time before cell phones, before digital footprints. A person could quietly fade away and the world would move on. And so it did. Hedviga's apartment remained sealed. Over time, the city reassigned ownership of various units in the building. Names changed, tenants moved in and out. But for some reason, and to this day, no one can truly explain why Hedviga's apartment remained untouched. Decades passed. The neighbors who once knew her grew old and passed away. New families moved in. To them, the locked unit was just another relic of bureaucracy, a property tied up in legal red tape. Rumors spread. Some believed it was empty, others thought it was used for storage. A few whispered that it was haunted, but no one entered. Not for 42 years. It wasn't until 2008 that the mystery unraveled. The city council had finally begun reassigning the long-abandoned units. A crew was sent to clean out the neglected apartment. As the door creaked open for the first time in over 4 decades, a musty air escaped, carrying the weight of time itself. What they found inside would shock not only Croatia, but the world. The apartment was a time capsule. Everything was frozen in the 1960s. Old newspapers were neatly stacked on the table, their headlines speaking of Tito's Yugoslavia and the space race. A vintage television set sat in the corner, untouched. Crocheted doilies adorned the furniture. The wallpaper had yellowed, but the room looked eerily preserved. And there, in a wooden armchair in front of the television, sat Hedviga Golik, still dressed in her housecoat, a cup of tea, untouched, resting on a side table. Her body had mummified naturally, preserved by the dry air and sealed windows. She looked as though she had simply dozed off while watching TV, but she never woke up. The officials were stunned by this discovery. How could a person go undiscovered for 42 years in the middle of a residential building? There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of foul play. The medical examiner concluded she had died of natural causes, likely a heart attack or stroke, alone, quietly in her chair. But the real mystery was not how she died, but how she was forgotten. No missing persons report, no family to check in, no friends knocking at her door. One neighbor recalled vaguely that she had just disappeared, but in a time of social upheaval and political tension, people didn't ask too many questions. Some say they believed the apartment had already been reclaimed by the state. The building's records had been poorly kept. Bureaucratic confusion meant her name remained tied to the unit, but no one acted. For years, it was assumed vacant. When the news broke, locals were horrified. Some were racked with guilt. Others feared the implications. Could this happen again? How many others lived alone, unseen, unheard? Journalists dubbed her the Sleeping Beauty of Zagreb, a woman frozen in time. Hedviga's story is more than just a curiosity. It's a chilling reminder of how modern life can forget the quiet ones, the elderly, the isolated, the reclusive. In a world that moves so fast, some are simply left behind. Their absence unnoticed until time itself forces us to look. Her apartment was eventually cleared, the furniture removed, the door unlocked forever. But the memory of that room, that chair, that cup of tea remains. Hedviga Golik didn't die in a faraway forest, or at sea, or in some remote mountain. She died right in the middle of the city, surrounded by people, yet completely alone. For 42 years she waited, and no one came. These two stories are not just tragic, they are a mirror, a reminder that the walls we build around ourselves, or the ones that are built around others, can become tombs if we're not careful. That even in the middle of a crowd, someone can disappear. That even surrounded by millions, a person can be forgotten. It begs us to ask who in our lives might be quietly fading. Who haven't we checked on? Who are we assuming is okay simply because we haven't heard otherwise?
If you are still here, many thanks for watching, and again, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future content. As you can see, this channel is just starting out, so please feel free to comment below with any suggestions or recommendations that you may have. I hope to see you at the next one.